devoted fan and a plugged-in reporter. There is no better way to talk about hoops than that. Mia O'Brien and Mitch Northam have you covered for the W, the NCAA, Unrivaled, and anything else that involves a ball and a backboard. This is the Women's Basketball Podcast.
Happy 2026, new year. I won't say same us, Mitch Northam, because you have a new job and we are taking it to another level here at the Women's Basketball Podcast, powered by OG Triangle Media. USA Today's Mitchell Northam. Excited to talk about the new gig. One of your stories here in the first 5 days of the new job over at USA Today will be the subject of tonight's little main event when we talk about the debut of Unrivaled Season 2. We've got 5 big-time college basketball storylines we need to hit right off the top. So much to do. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us for this first episode of the calendar year. Before I go any further, though, Mitch, do tell. We're very excited for the new gig. What will you be covering for USA Today?
Now through probably, the Final Four and portal season, the focus is going to be on women's college basketball and some other women's sports here and there. I did write about Unrivaled today. I'll probably dip my toes into helping them out with some Winter Olympic stuff, which I just snuck up on me. I didn't even realize it was a Winter Olympics year, but it definitely is. So I'm excited. And then this summer, I think I'll be doing some World Cup stuff. So,
love it.
But right now, it's all women's college basketball. So, and there's plenty to write about and talk about and all that good stuff. So I'm excited to kind of get back on the horse here with them.
We are excited for you, and what better place to start than in the women's college ranks with this week's starting 5, our 5 college games or team storylines that we have to talk about before we go any further with today's program. Let's begin with a storyline that not only comes up seemingly every week on the Women's Basketball Podcast, Mitch, but it was the lead in last week's starting 5, and it is still the lead 2 weeks after our holiday break. Duke, are they for real? You would not go as far as to say, yes, this is the Kara Lawson team that was promised in the preseason last time we spoke. But today, something tells me you have a different sentiment.
I do. I do think that Duke is back. I do think that Duke, as I posted on Twitter, has their stuff together. I didn't say stuff, but I think that this is the Duke team, or pretty close to it, that was promised when they were picked preseason favorites in the ACC. They have now won 6 in a row. They comfortably beat Notre Dame on Sunday in Cameron Indoor by 14 points. I think they led for 90% of the game. It wasn't quite wire to wire, but pretty close. And I had a couple takeaways, like just from watching them. I also watched them play against South Dakota State a couple weeks ago. And I think I've kind of come to the realization there's a couple of things that I think have kind of set Duke on the right path. And I think first off, I think as it turns out, and we'll kind of juxtapose this with another team that we're going to talk about, LSU, I think playing a tough non-conference schedule kind of puts you in a better position to be prepared for the conference slate. If you go to Her Hoop Stats and you look at the average net rating of your opponents, Duke played the toughest schedule in the country so far. They are, I think it's like a 16.7 mark. So pretty tough. LSU, as we know, did not play a tough schedule. I think Duke was the toughest team that LSU played. Meanwhile, Duke was also playing South Carolina and UCLA, and they played in Paris against Baylor, and they played basically at West Virginia, and they played at South Florida, and they also played at Belmont and South Dakota State and all these things. And I think while Duke took on some of those losses, and while some of those losses were like really, really bad, like you're still Duke. You shouldn't lose back-to-back years at South Florida. You shouldn't have lost that game to West Virginia where they finished the game with just 5 players. You shouldn't have looked uncompetitive against UCLA and South Carolina. Having said all that, I think Duke now is peaking at a better time, and they're trending in the right direction as conference play begins. And they are closer to their goals, I think, than LSU is to theirs, because Duke has already exposed its problems in November, and they've already figured it out, and they've solved some things. I think a couple of the big things is like they've turned Taina Mare into their bus driver. She is scoring at a very high level right now, and Carol Lawson said, this was always in her. We just didn't ask her to do this before because we had wings like Alucci and Reagan Richardson who needed the ball last year, and all those things. And I think the other thing is Riley Nelson entering the starting lineup. Duke hasn't lost since Riley Nelson started starting games, which was at Virginia Tech. Over Jaden Donovan, I think Riley Nelson gives them a better shooter from three-point land. She gives them a little bit more better ball handling, a little bit more athleticism. She's really coming to her own and looking like the McDonald's All-American that she was when she committed to Maryland. So you compare that to LSU. LSU has now lost back-to-back games, and now they have to figure out their problems in January because none of those problems were exposed back in November and December when they were playing Sisters of the Poor and School of the Blind. And so I find that kind of, those two case studies to be pretty interesting. Having said all that, I do think Duke is really trending in the right direction now. I was talking actually to our friend Aaron Beard at the AP, and he's trying to do a little bit kind of planning ahead. And we were talking about, who might host NCAA games here in the Triangle in the first round, because last year we had all three hosting. And he was like, Carolina's still probably like our best bet for that, right? I was like, yeah, but I think Duke could play their way into it. I think if Duke keeps playing like this and they run through an ACC that I think we can all say it's a down year for the ACC. If they run through the ACC, they can get a top 16 seed, no problem. Yeah.
And especially in light of North Carolina and NC State's most recent results, which may or may not have come against the same team. So to your point, yes, I would argue that Duke is now trending in the right direction. To your point about LSU, Duke, the idea of strength of schedule versus you cruise through the non-con. Let me introduce number 2 in this week's starting 5, another reoccurring bit on this podcast, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, the team that Duke demolished 83-68, won wire to wire. I understand that Hannah Hidalgo is, as one coach told me, maybe not a top 5 player in the league. In the league, number 1, I think she is the ACC Player of the Year as of this writing, but we'll put that off to the side. She may not be the top 5 player nationally that some believe her to be. She is number 2 in scoring behind only Audie Crooks, so we will put that out there, Notre Dame fans. Never say we didn't say anything nice about you. But despite the 25.3 points per game for the star player for Niele Ivy's Fighting Irish, it doesn't matter because, they're number 1 in the conference in scoring. They are number 12 in defense out of 18 teams. This is an offense that is predicated on defense and forcing turnovers, which they are number 1 in forcing turnovers in the ACC. But they are also 16th out of 18 teams in rebounding, Mitch. I don't know who brought that up on a podcast in the summer. It couldn't have been you and me, right? No way in heck that we were the ones who said, I have some concerns about this roster construction with Notre Dame. To be fair, the Fighting Irish have not shied away from elite competition. They hosted USC at Purcell Pavilion earlier in the non-conference portion of the 2025-2026 season. It's not to say Notre Dame hasn't wanted that smoke, but outside of that game in which they caused an ungodly amount of turnovers against a USC team that, let's be real, they're in that weird limbo year where Jazzy Davidson, I did not say Henderson, write that one down, folks. Jazzy Davidson is coming along into her own. Now, if only I could get poor Abby Knopf here in UNF. She's my new mental block. I say Knopf instead of Knopf. Listen, Jazzy Henderson, Jazzy Davidson, we have moved on. Now we're Abby Knopf. Point being, that's a USC team that, let's be real, they're in the weird limbo year without Juju, and Jazzy's coming into her own. So, like, I don't want to say that win doesn't count, but ultimately, Notre Dame is another example of a team that wasn't afraid to schedule during the non-con, but at the same time, we had this impression of, oh yeah, they're still going to vie for a top 16 seed. Like they're going to host in the NCAA tournament. And I'm not so sure as conference play begins. So you were at Cameron Indoor. Tell us that 82-68 game. It truly was Duke domination and raised even more flags about number 2 in this week's starting 5.
I think the difference between Notre Dame and Duke and then and playing those tough schedules in the non-con is Duke had the opportunity to make changes and fix things. Notre Dame does not have the opportunity to change things and fix things because there's no one else on the roster to change. You can't, oh, well, we'll bench this player and start this player. We'll switch this lineup up. They don't have the bodies, which was our concern coming into the year. I was looking, just kind of watching this game, as Duke is pulling away. I look at the bench and I'm like, Notre Dame has 10 players. They're playing a 6-player rotation. The other 4 are on the bench, still their warm-ups on. They know they're not coming into the game. So that tells me that Niele Ivey, I just think all of this is on her. This is just a butchered case of roster management. She has a roster, and it's clear to me the other 4 players, she just doesn't believe that they can help them, which is bad. That's not good.
Because that means you missed in recruiting them, especially coming into a season in which you had to flip all but 3 of your scholarship spots.
You missed in talent evaluation. You missed in the portal. And here's the thing. I've seen a lot of Notre Dame fans on Twitter kind of making this excuse. Someone in my mentions was like, well, it's really hard to transfer into Notre Dame. The admission rate is 9%, and a lot of players' credits don't transfer over. A lot of private schools have to deal with that. Stanford, who we'll get to, is another team that has that same issue. And so if you're
Duke
Notre Dame,
has that issue.
Duke has that issue too. And Duke does not. Riley Nelson might be their only transfer. I would have to go back and check that. But point being, like, this is not a new issue for Notre Dame. Like, your academic standards did not change last offseason, right? So Niele Ivey knows all of this. And if you can't build through the portal in the modern era, like a lot of other teams are doing, you have to build a different mousetrap. You have to go get the freshmen and develop them and retain them. And they're not doing that. And so I just think, and before we should mention this, before they lost to Duke, they lost at Georgia Tech.
Oh, wait. Before you go any further, Mitch, because I realized I was so excited to get to the Hannah Hidalgo stat versus the defensive and rebounding numbers for Notre Dame as a collective. I didn't get to do my my musical ceremonial ritual reading of the last 3 games for Notre Dame. Please cue up the world's smallest violin. A win against Pitt, 94-59. Hang the banner, folks. Because Mitch, who did Pitt lose to earlier this year?
Division III Scranton.
Thank you. And then came a dramatic 95-90 loss against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, who lost to, who was that earlier this year, Mitch?
Take your pick. Didn't they lose to Jacksonville?
That they did, Mitch. That they did. Shout out to Special Jennings, listener of the pod. And then, yes, an 82-68 loss at Cameron Indoor. And on the horizon for this Notre Dame team. The good news is they play Boston College. Who did Boston College lose to earlier this year, Mitch?
Almost everybody.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Yep.
Pretty much every other Division I team in the Northeast.
Holy Cross, Harvard, take your pick. And then comes the Murderers Row. Home against North Carolina, home against Louisville, and then at number 1 UConn on Martin Luther King Day. So if you don't believe us right now, with the misconstructed roster that is Notre Dame, trust me, you are going to see it over the next few weeks. And that's not to knock Niele Ivey, who I have immense respect. I love her outfits. I enjoy her coaching style. Not everyone on the internet does. And I understand that they have the nation's number 2 scorer, who some accounts would tell you that she's a top 5 player in the country. I've talked to enough coaches in the last few weeks from calling games that she's more like a top 10 player. Mm-hmm. And again, my biggest issue with this roster construction, Mitch, is that their offense, because of the limitations that exist, their offense is predicated on forcing turnovers, which is cool. Except what happens when you can't steal the ball? What happens when you don't force those turnovers? Can you make a shot? Can you win on the boards? Because Notre Dame is not doing either of those right now outside of their star player. Let's keep it moving with a team that knocked off another one that we already mentioned in the LSU Tigers, and another team that are way too early predictions over the last 3-4 months. It comes to fruition. The Kentucky Wildcats. Mitch, the floor is yours for number 3 in this week's starting 5.
Yeah. So this is kind of like now mixed feelings about Kentucky, because on the one hand, when they beat LSU, I was definitely taking a victory lap. That was a super impressive win, down in Baton Rouge, getting it done. Tony Morgan, 24 points, 12 assists. You had a ridiculously awesome double-double from Tiani Key. It was just one of those games where I felt like everything I was saying about Kentucky kind of came true. It's like they are the longest team in the country. They have just so much depth in the post between Clara Strack, Tiani Key, and Amelia Hassett. And then you had this awesome point guard in Tony Morgan, who just knows – when to score and when to set up all those posts. And they got it done down there at LSU. Then they follow that up, though, with another win, which was great over Missouri. Very comfortable win, except Tiani Key apparently has dislocated her elbow. And I feel so bad for Tiani Key, who is one of those players that I spent a lot of time with when I spent that year with North Carolina in the 23-24 season. She has just had the worst luck with injuries and things. Missed what would have been her natural freshman season after she tore her knee up in a scrimmage against South Carolina. And then, comes back and has battled injuries, kind of throughout her time in North Carolina. Had a foot injury that she dealt with in that year that I was with them. Then she goes to Kentucky and kind of is revitalized under Kenny Brooks. Has a really solid year last year in a starting role, and this year playing a really big key role for them too. So what I've seen on Twitter is that she has a dislocated elbow. I don't know how long a dislocated elbow keeps somebody out. I've never dislocated my elbow. I don't know the extent of that. I don't know if that needs surgery to repair. I don't know, but that's a big bummer to Kentucky's ceiling, I think. And the great wins, for them this past week. But I just wonder how much that impacts their ceiling.
They are 15-1, tied for first, with that undefeated mark in SEC play. They travel to Alabama later this week before hosting number 5 Oklahoma on Sunday. Get your popcorn ready for that one. Let's keep it moving. The SEC, decent, I would say, start to the 2025-2026 season. The Big 12, another bold prediction we had from the fall prior to the season tipping off. Words can't describe what we have seen from the Big 12, a conference that we quite literally had a segment earlier this year on the pod entitled Say Something Nice About the Big 12. And here we are. The Big 12 is the best conference, Mitch, in women's basketball. I'm going to run through a couple different games, and I'm going to stop after each one real quick just so you can react to it, because I think all of these kind of need to be lumped together to show just how insane, how dog eat dog, night in, night out, anyone can get anyone this conference has been this year. Previously undefeated TCU. Let's begin with them. They go to Salt Lake City. They fall to Utah in overtime, 87-77. A 3 with 10.8 seconds to go ties it up. They head to OT. Shout out to Utah, 22 assists on 26 made baskets. They shot 57% from 3-point range. Here's the thing with the Utes that then is going to build into the next game I'm going to discuss. The Utes have 4 losses up to this point, Mitch. And as we talk about non-con, strength of schedule, yada, yada, yada. Their 4 losses as of this writing after defeating TCU, previously undefeated, previously a top 10 outfit. Yes, shout out to Olivia Miles. I know everyone wants to, talk about that as being the headliner, her dropping a career high. And I respect that. But for me, the story is Utah, not just because they won the game, but here are their 4 losses. Washington, who picked up a pretty big win in the Big Ten over the weekend over a team that, hey, listen, we're buying Maryland this year, so file that one away. Syracuse, a team that we also are buying and also arguably has the best freshman in the ACC. UConn, we'll give you a pass because right now they're the number 1 team in the country. And finally, Arizona State, who is 15-1. Wait for it. Arizona State, also of the Big 12, just lost their first game of the season of the Molly Miller era to 13-2 BYU, and BYU's only losses are to TCU and Vanderbilt. So,
Yeah.
and Vanderbilt, by the way, they beat LSU and beat a top 10 opponent for the first time since 2009 over the weekend. And so I compile all that to say, before we get to two other notes from the Big 12, this conference is as dog eat dog as any. I am so excited to see what the next 2 months have, because I have no idea who's winning it at this point.
Yeah, I was just counting. I'm looking at the Big 12 standings right now. I think there's 9 NCAA tournament teams in this league. It's just wild to me. Like, if you told me at the start of the season, like by January, Texas Tech will be at the top of the Big 12 standings, and they will be undefeated, I would have told you were taking crazy pills. West Virginia is right up there behind them. They've won 7 in a row now. They're 3-0 in the Big 12. Then you got, Arizona State with Molly Miller, Baylor, Utah, TCU, BYU playing well. Iowa State right there with Audi Crooks, and then our Oklahoma State Cowgirls, who we have talked a lot about on this podcast. I think all those teams are NCAA tournament teams. And then, by the way, like, you have, Kansas State down there, who's had kind of a weird up and down season. Like, they're one of those teams that can beat anyone but also lose to anyone.
Right.
I feel like they're gonna, spoil things for another team in the Big 12 at some point this season. It is a super deep conference this year, really stacked. I don't know who's going to win this thing. I would tell you, I would love to see, just from a pure basketball standpoint, like a Big 12 title game with TCU and Iowa State. Mm-hmm. But we could very well have Texas Tech versus West Virginia, or Baylor versus Utah, or Arizona State versus Oklahoma State. Like, it's an awesome league. And I was talking to somebody about this. We're going to do some like mid-season, women's basketball awards at USA Today. And, I think everybody agrees, like, when you just look eye test wise, like, is Sarah Strong the best player in the country? Yes, probably. But I think when you're, the player of the year awards and stuff, some of that is narrative. And I think when you look at, all right, the second half of the seasons, Audi Crooks is going to be playing against ranked teams on ESPN a lot. And Sarah Strong is going to be beating up a pretty weak Big East and probably playing like 25 minutes a game on, Fox and True TV.
Well, so to be fair, Audi Crooks is also playing 25 minutes a game, but she's also dropping 30 instead 25.
Right. Yeah, she's scoring 30 points a game and shooting 70% from the floor. By the way, you'll like this stat. Since 2009, there are only 2 players who have shot north of 70% from the floor while attempting at least 15 field goal attempts. One is Audi Crooks. The other is Megan Gustafson.
Be still my heart. The Hawkeye State, or Cyclone State, whatever we're calling it these days. You mentioned Texas Tech. In case you missed it, folks, the Red Raiders in women's basketball, 16-0, avenging their god-awful performance in the college football playoff. The men's team is doing okay as well. We're going to hit them a little bit later in last call because producer Dimitri has some exciting, interesting, fun news on the Red Raiders. So we'll hit that a little bit later, but I did want to note they are in first place in the conference, one of 4 undefeated teams left in the country. And you mentioned Baylor, Mitch. They handed Iowa State their first loss of the 2025-2026 season on Talia Scott. Who else? Game-winning jumper, 2.9 seconds to go. She scored 11 straight, all 21 of her points in the second half. More interesting, they held Audi Crooks to 26 points. And she only scored 4 in the second half. Baylor packed the paint, basically said, Jada Williams, go ahead. You can try to beat us, which she did drop a career-high 28. So shout out to the Arizona transfer. She did shoot the lights out from three-point land. But basically they said Audi Crooks is not going to beat us. As we've discussed on this podcast before, the thing with Audi Crooks, the thing with Iowa State is you better have waves of bigs because you are going to be in foul trouble going up against her. And so it's a credit to the crew in Waco that they were able to find a way to finally stop her. I also think Talia Scott making shots in the second half was equally as critical, which, don't forget, another preseason prediction of ours after they defeated Duke on opening day in women's college basketball this year. If Talia Scott stays healthy, I covered her in high school, folks, like she is a walking bucket. You just got to lock her in, like, rein it in, and you got to keep her healthy. And that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I think Baylor did what a lot of people have been wondering why other teams haven't done, is just like you see some of these clips on, social media of Audi Crooks just kind of doing Hakeem stuff in the paint. And they're all like, why aren't teams double and triple teaming her? And Baylor finally did it and dared the rest of Iowa State to beat with them, and they couldn't. So I think that's a challenge for Iowa State going forward, is like, when teams do decide to do that, you need other players to step up, and you're going to need more of that as the season goes along.
Took a game-winning bucket, though, as time was expiring. So, hey, I mean, even with Baylor unlocking the secret code to stopping Audi Crooks, even then it took a last-second shot to defeat the Cyclones and hand them their first loss of the season. Number 5, rounded out this week's starting 5, Mitch, with a team that paid a trip to the Triangle last week and paid dividends.
Yeah, some mixed results for Stanford in their first real ACC road swing of the season. I wrote about them after they lost to NC State in a pretty ugly game where like they closed the gap at the end of the second quarter and then just kind of got steamrolled in the second half. So last season, Stanford was, I think, 2-7 in ACC road games. And the loss against NC State was not a good sign for them. I think we can all agree that like this Stanford team is better than the one that they put on the floor last year. I think a big reason for that is they have these really great rookies and Laura Samfe and Haley Swain. And then you have, some good steady-handed veterans like Nunu Agara and Chloe Clardy and Courtney Ogden. Chloe Clardy did not play against NC State. I think that was kind of a big thing for them. She comes back against North Carolina, and they beat the Tar Heels in OT in Chapel Hill, which is their first ranked road win in conference play since they have joined the ACC. So that is a good sign for Stanford. I think they are back. I think they are an NCAA tournament team. I don't think they're back as like a contender for the national title or even the ACC title quite yet, but they are going to be, I think, a team in March Madness. They're really, really solid on defense. I think the NC State game, maybe over time, that might be seen as like an aberration, like, your first real road game of the season on the, opposite coast and all that. I think the game they played against North Carolina is more like the team that they actually are. I bring up Stanford because, like we talked about earlier with Notre Dame, like sometimes if your academics are restricting you, you got to build a different mousetrap, right? So Stanford, among all Power 4 programs, has the least number of transfers on its roster this season. The only player on their team that did not start her career at Stanford is Mary Ashley Stevenson, who has already been there a year. She started at Purdue. Stanford is also tied with Washington for Power 4 programs who had the least amount of portal movement last offseason. They had 2 players leave, and they brought nobody in. They just brought in freshmen, and it turns out those freshmen are really, really good. And Stanford is going to have to lean on them, and then beyond this season, they're going to have to retain them and keep developing them. So Kate Pay, that's the idea that I'm talking about when I talk about Notre Dame, of like building a different mousetrap and figuring out a different way to construct your roster. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. I know, like, we're in this modern era with the portal and NIL and rev share. Look, if you don't have those resources to do that, you got to do it a different way. Stanford is, I think we should view them as like a top 5 ACC team going forward this season.
All right. I like that, Mitch. They are 13-3 prior to that 74-46 loss to NC State. Their only other 2 losses came by a combined 7 points. Quick math here, a little bit difficult. At a neutral site in Las Vegas in an MTE over the Thanksgiving holiday to Florida Gulf Coast, 66-62. Shout out to Raina Harmon and the Eagles. And then to Killikim and the Tennessee Volunteers, 65-62 back in December. So Stanford is for real. Duke is back. Notre Dame, not so much. LSU, just try to play somebody in the non-con. We're begging you. That is a wrap of this week's starting 5, but still a whole heck of a lot to do here on the Women's Basketball Podcast, which, without further ado, we got to talk our beef of the week.
Pure beef. The
beef is coming. Don't worry. We love beef. I don't care if it's 2025, 2026. You know, Mitch and I have your fix of the beef in women's basketball. But also, if you really like that nifty little animation we have there, that nifty little sound effect, you could check out our friends over at auditoryfx.com. Make your podcast sound bigger and more professional. All the audio tools you need to take your show to the next level. Hey, maybe you forgot to get somebody a gift over the Christmas holiday, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. How about a little makeup gift here in the month of January with our friends at auditoryfx.com? Packages start as low as $19.99. All right, Mitch, this one happened over the aforementioned Christmas holiday when UCLA paid a trip out to Ohio State. And so I begin this explanation of this week's beef of the week with the tweet that sent the women's basketball stratosphere on fire. This is from Ben Royer of the LA Times and of the Orange County Register. UCLA women's basketball coach Cori Close said that I, as in Ben Royer, from Los Angeles, not in Columbus for the game, was the only media member to talk with her after UCLA's win over Ohio State. Close said she did not mind if I printed her response. So here it is in full. Here is the quote. Honestly, if I'm being really blunt with you, the energy in the building was great, but having no media here at all from either team or either, no AP, no nothing, doesn't say a lot. We're the only double-ranked game out today, the only one in the country, and we had no media today, no media here. You're the only one that's asked to talk to me, and credit to you, but I don't mind if you print that either. Like, for the only game that had two ranked opponents to not have more coverage over this particular game, disappointing, honestly. Mitch Northam, that was on December the 28th, prior to your arrival at USA Today Sports when you were in the limbo in between jobs. The floor is yours as the resident national women's basketball reporter on this program. What say you to our friends, the women's basketball equivalent of James Franklin? Sorry, I had to fit that in there somewhere. What do you say to the UCLA head coach's comments?
My initial reaction was, does Cori Close want to start a media company? Because there's a lot of different ways you can take this, and I think there's a lot of nuance here. And I think I'll start by saying this. I think Cori Close actually cares. I think she really is like invested in growing the game and media coverage and being available.
Quick interjection to that. I do want to note, because I was paying attention to this. It would have been the week prior. Mm-hmm. She and UCLA were hosting, I forget who the opponent was later that night, but she was on Fox's pregame show for the Tennessee,
I saw that as well,
Louisville, and then Iowa UConn game. So that was that Saturday in December prior to the college, or it was the same day as the first college football playoff, whenever it was. I think it was like December 19th or the 20th or something like that. She was up at 6, 7 in the morning, Pacific Coast time, prior to a night game on the West Coast. And she was on the pregame show at Fox Studios. And so I do want to just throw that out there, because I do appreciate Cori Close does indeed walk the walk in addition to talk the talk.
Yeah. And she's a former WBCA president. And I do really think that she's somebody who cares about growing the game. And excuse me. One more cough.
Yes, one more cough, as I do note that Cori Close, like James Franklin, never met a microphone she doesn't like, which will probably make you laugh more and have to cough again.
So, somebody who does really care about growing the game. And I think her intention was, I think she was trying to take a shot at the local media in Los Angeles for not covering her team, which has been ranked in the top 5, went to the Final Four last year, probably has the number 1 overall draft pick in the upcoming WNBA draft on their roster, all those things. They are not covered the way that a top 5 men's team at USC or UCLA would be, or a, really good football team that's going to play in the college football playoff or something like that. Right. So I think that was one of her intentions, was just to kind of take a little shot at them. I will say on that front, this is kind of a self-inflicted problem for UCLA because now you play conference games in the Big Ten on the East Coast, time zones away, against Ohio State. And this was a game played over the holiday break. And, maybe if you were playing that game at Stanford or Cal or somewhere like that, maybe someone from the LA Times would have been more willing to travel to that game. But here's where we are, right? You and USC made the decision to go to the Big Ten and basically put the first nail in the coffin of the Pac-12, right? So there's that piece of it. I think she was also trying to take a shot at just the national media in general, for maybe ignoring her team and not covering her team the same way that UConn and South Carolina and like some of those are covered. I just want to say though, UConn and South Carolina, the local media in those markets cover those teams really, really well. They have dedicated readership. They're like multiple newspapers send, reporters to travel with both of those teams to a lot of games. And you have like the team sites too, your On Threes and your Rivals and, whatever out there at 247. So there's a big kind of media network that are covering both of those teams. I don't think that exists out in LA with UCLA. The other thing is like there are no pro sports in South Carolina, and there are also no pro sports in Connecticut. Do I have that right?
The Connecticut Sun, which we're gonna get to them. I'm sure.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I did the thing. My apologies. But not competing as the same time as UConn, right? Like there's not an NBA team, there's not an NFL team that's playing at the same time. So there's less, you can concentrate your coverage a little bit more if you do really care about your colleges. Whereas in LA, there's so much going on, and I'm not trying to make excuses for them. The other thing is just like, those local media companies, they're not really expanding their sports coverage these days. I have just found this out the hard way as I just went through a job search. There's not a lot of, websites and newspapers and stuff out there. USA Today is one of the few exceptions that are expanding their coverage of sports in general and women, and then, even further down, women's sports, unfortunately. So that I think is just, that's how the business is today. And it sucks. And I agree with Cori Close that it sucks. And I agree with her that it's a massive bummer that there wasn't more media coverage at this game between two top 25 teams, one of which is in the top 5, all of that good stuff. I'm glad she's speaking on it. I'm glad she's putting her opinions out there. I'm just not sure how you fix it in today's, day and age. Like I've talked a lot about, the situation I was in basically before I started with SB Nation. The first 4 Final Fours that I went to, I pretty much paid my own way and kind of made up the money after the fact by doing a bunch of freelance work for multiple outlets. Like I was basically the Baltimore Banner's Angel Reese reporter for 2 of those NCAA tournaments. And I was doing work at For the Win and for the AP and for, a couple different outlets, because I care and because I love this sport and I want to cover it. But not everybody can do what I do. And not everybody, there are some people that take losses in trying to cover this sport, or they just have a completely different full-time job that's out of journalism that kind of funds, their coverage of women's college basketball and the WNBA as well. So that's the ecosystem that we're in, and it's a massive bummer. And so I think like ultimately I agree with her, and I hate that the lack of coverage and all that good stuff. I think it could have come across a better way. I think the messaging and maybe the time and place could have been a little bit better. But having all said all that, like there was like a follow-up to this too, where she was, I think Front Office Sports did this story where she gave a statement and I think one of her problems is that there was a lack of a formal press conference for the opposing head coach. And that's a Big Ten problem. Yeah. If you're the Big Ten, like there's an easy way to fix that. You can just mandate it. You can just mandate that Cori Close go to the press conference, whether she's requested or not. Right. We just had this at North Carolina a couple weeks ago where there wasn't any Louisville media that traveled to that game. But Jeff Walls came into the post-game press conference and talked to us for like 15 minutes and waved off his SID and was like, no, I got time here. Like, we can do a few more questions. Jeff Walls loves to do that.
Because he also has never met a Mike he doesn't like. Continue.
Yes, agreed. But on the overall big problem, I kind of think the toothpaste is out of the tube. When it comes to media companies expanding sports coverage, especially print media. And she made that comment about, how the AP, well, she said the AP wasn't there. The AP was there.
They were talking to Ohio State.
Well, I don't even know if they were doing that. So the kind of inside baseball thing here is the AP beginning last year doesn't require quotes for game recaps for college basketball and college football anymore, right? So, I do some stringing for the AP, and I've written those recaps, and I always go to the post-game press conferences just because there might be something in those press conferences that is said or whatever that's newsworthy or interesting, and maybe the AP would like a breakout story on that, right? It doesn't seem like, this writer went to those press conferences based on the front office sports story. It sounded like she had another assignment to get to the NHL game, which is another issue like that I just kind of talked about like the understaffing and the not expanding of sports coverage. She was juggling all these things. So yeah, Cori Close, like nothing newsy happened over the course of the game. Like there wasn't a record broken or an injury or anything like that. So she probably didn't really have a reason to go talk to Cori Close. And so like that's another problem. Right. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of parts of the media ecosystem that's a little bit broken. Cori Close, if you and some of your other fellow head coaches out there who make 6-7 figures a year, you guys want to pool some money together and start a media company that covers your sport, go for it. Until then, I don't know how this gets fixed.
To put a bow on this week's beef of the week, by the way, UCLA won 82-75. They followed that up with a 97-61 drubbing of Penn State. Shout out to the product out in State College. And then they wrapped up the Christmas vacation with an 80-46 wire-to-wire win over crosstown rivals USC. And for good measure, Ben Royer of the Orange County Register tweeted out the opening comment from Cori Close. She sat at the podium at Pauley Pavilion, and she said, quote, "Look at all these amazing media members here. Thank you so much." Thank you, Cori, for this week's beef of the week. We're going to do a mini main event because we want to spotlight Mitch's work at USA Today. We also want to spotlight the Unrivaled season tipping off tonight, Monday, January 5th, as we're recording this podcast. So, Mitch, tell us your thoughts from the press conference you were a part of. And additionally, as we peel back the layers, Unrivaled season 2, it's going to be a blast. I don't think I'm breaking any news there. However, no Nafisa Collier, who will have surgery and will be out 4 to 6 months, which also will impact the WNBA season, which, of course, she is also a vice president of the WNBPA, which continues its ongoing negotiations for a new CBA agreement with the league.
Yeah. So Alex Basil, the
also Nafisa Collier's husband, file that one away.
Also Nafisa Collier's husband.
It's all intertwined, folks.
Had a press conference this morning. We're recording this on a Monday. Unrivaled began today, its second season. I just wrote about it USA Today, like a couple of things that kind of stood out to me about what he was saying. The first thing was he said, we want to build this into the Champions League of women's basketball. I don't think that's like, you can't exactly do an apples to apples thing of that, but I think to his point, Champions League has the best soccer teams in Europe playing in it, right? Unrivaled for the most part, aside from Caitlin Clark and Asia Wilson this season, has the best women's basketball players on the planet playing in it. You got Brianna Stewart, you got Kelsey Plum, you got Aaliyah Boston, you got rising stars like Dominique Malanga and Paige Beckers. I think the good sign for them is like they're still continuing to get big name investors and sponsors. They got I found out this morning that Maker's Mark is the official bourbon of Unrivaled, which I was like, hey, if you guys want to do media gifts, I'll take a bottle. But they're on TNT and HBO Max again, so their product is accessible, which is a big thing we've talked about on this podcast. It's not on Flow Hoops or Baller TV, which is very good for them. So that was one thing that stood out to me. I also he talked about Paige Beckers coming into the league and, said that, Paige is a superstar and she raises the level of everyone else. And I think that's what's really important. Paige is one of these players where viewers and fans follow her wherever she is and wherever she's playing. So I would be interested to see kind of what the viewership metrics are in games that Paige plays in this season for Unrivaled versus games that she's not playing in and things like that. He was also asked a little bit about, I think one of the things that people are kind of tiptoeing around a little bit without directly coming out and saying it is like, there might be a little conflict of interest here between Unrivaled and the WNBA. Like it's interesting to me because both of these two sides publicly say that we're not in competition with each other. Right.
Because it's a different sport. It's 3-on-3 versus 5-on-5.
However, it can't be ignored that the vice presidents for the WNBA Players Association, Brianna Stewart and Afisa Collier, also happen to be the founders of Unrivaled. And I don't think it can be ignored that Unrivaled is offering better compensation currently than the WNBA, with 6-figure salaries for all of its players and equity in the league for all of its players, which are two things that the WNBA players are now trying to negotiate for in their CBA. And, he was asked, I believe Annie Costable of Front Office Sports asked him this about, hey, so if the WNBA players get what they're asking for in terms of money, is there maybe a chance that the WNBA tries to basically implement a exclusivity clause where it forbids its players from playing in other leagues? This, by the way, just kind of another sports business thing, was kind of something that NASCAR just like went to court about over.
Yep.
This was like a thing in that, some of the racers wanted to, drive in this other series that started up, and NASCAR was like, no way. And, so all that. And, you don't see like Major League Baseball players from the most part going to play in, Mexico or whatever. Yeah, you don't see active NBA players going to play in other leagues, right? NFL, is there still an NFL Europe? I don't know. But like, you don't see like, Patrick Mahomes is also like not playing in the XFL or whatever, right? Or whatever the second tier league is now. So, he was asked kind of, hey, this might be a possibility. What do you think about that? And he said, I don't believe that future is near. But then he said, these are all business decisions, playing at the WNBA, playing overseas, playing with us. We continue to be really adamant that we're providing the best spot for all the best players. And as long as we do that, inevitably, it's going to solve some of the problems that really aren't in our control, right? And then he was asked about partnering with the WNBA, and he was said, we're not in constant dialogue of that. I don't want to speak too much of what's going on behind the scenes, but as I've made very clear, we're open to growing the ecosystem.
By the way, everyone, like the word of 25-26 in sports management is ecosystem. I just had to throw that out there as someone who covers the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's the new buzzword, folks.
And in 2025, it felt like that word was alignment. I heard that a lot when it came to like college coaches and
get ready to learn
in alignment with the money. The money people at whatever school you're talking about. So that kind of all stood out to me. And I also just kind of believe that the WNBA and Unrivaled, both sides, I don't think they actually want to be partners with each other. But
no, because they don't want to pay for each other. Like it's the same reason that the Upshot League is going to operate in a separate silo. Like you can create, and it's the same reason, not that the NFL doesn't have money to run the UFL if they wanted to, but the reason they're operating separately is because they don't want to have to pay for them. and vice versa. And so I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. To your point, I do want to briefly mention the latest update with regards to those CBA negotiations from Alexa Philippou from ESPN. And if you have anything else to add, Mitch, definitely do so. But to your point, the big sticking point, and it's hilarious when juxtaposed with Unrivaled debuting for its second season this week, and the idea of players have equity in the league. The biggest sticking point right now, reportedly, is the idea of gross revenue versus net revenue. And of course, net revenue compared to gross revenue, which is the total generated monies. Net revenue is when you subtract the operating costs away. And so the Players Association would like to see a 30% of gross revenue, be allocated in a $10.5 million salary cap per team. According to the league, that would be a windfall of $700 million. I don't know where they got that number from, Mitch, but that right now is the biggest sticking point, is this idea of gross revenue versus net revenue. Look, they can look at Unrivaled. I mean, you could just give up some of that equity with all these WNBA teams being valued in the six figures and counting, trending towards seven. Like,
yeah.
Okay, just throw that out there. Not six figures. I meant to say not six figures. I meant to say nine figures.
Yeah, my colleague at USA Today, actually, Heather Burns, just posted a story that has a statement from Terry Jackson, the WNBA Players Association executive director, who says the players know the difference between doing business and creating clickbait. They are focused on the system. Despite what the league and teams are trying to do, the players are not confused by the numbers. Blah, 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 blah. I cannot comment on the specifics of any proposal, but I can speak hypothetically. The players would not have opted out of the 2020 CBA with a fixed salary system, giving them less than 10% of the revenue that their labor drives, only to agree to a salary system that is arguably tied to revenue, but now gives them less than 15%. The business has grown considerably, and the league and the teams project incredible, sustainable growth into the foreseeable future. How do the capital investors, change makers, anyone who cares about women's sports, supports women's athletes, understands the value of this investment, believe this could be a good deal? Again, hypothetically speaking.
Go Hawks. Shout out to Heather. So here's the other point that y'all need to know as we wrap up this segment. The WNBPA, the Players Association, in case you missed it, they have voted as a collective. 93% of the 98% of the total players in the league voted that their voting rights have now been transferred to that executive committee. We ran through that on last week's episode. Go check it out in case you missed it. And so that executive committee has until January 9th, 4 days after we're recording this podcast, really 3 because we're recording this at night. They have 3 days on that extension agreement to agree to a new CBA, or there could be this weird limbo period, Mitch, where they're operating under the current CBA and it's called status quo. And we just kind of keep on keeping on without that executive committee voting on a strike.
Yeah, it's messy. It's messy. I don't know where we're heading, but it's gotten really messy.
Yeah, I spoke with some folks just around basketball because I called a couple of games and just been talking to folks over the last few weeks. And there is optimism, I will say, from other parts of the world and of the basketball world. There is optimism that the deal will be done that the WNBA will play in the spring. Like, there will not be a lockout. And if there is, it will be minimal. Games will not be canceled. And in turn, players who could have played elsewhere, whether across the pond or here in the States, wink, 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 this summer, they will be playing in the WNBA because the WNBA will have a season. So take with that information what you will, read between the lines as we keep it moving and we barrel towards making money with Mitch, our weekly pick segment where Mitch Northam is now 17-4 on the season, folks. Round of applause. He is 2-1. He was 2-1 last week because Duke is back. He tried to bet against the Blue Devils and also an elite cover by the Michigan Wolverines during their Pacific Northwest road trip out to face the Ducks of Oregon. All right, Mitch, what we got this week in this week's 3-pack?
So I checked the lines today on Massey Ratings, and I was looking at Wednesday's slate, and this one just stuck out to me as odd. So, I think this line is going to move, but For right now, this is what it is. So Wednesday, Texas Tech plays at West Virginia. Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus, and West Virginia is favored by 10.5 points. I will take the Red Raiders to cover that spread.
I just think they're going to the folks out in the desert think that Texas Tech's just going to come back down to earth. And in a Big 12 where it's anybody's game, I think they just think they're going to get picked off by the Greenbrier Five. Respect the Greenbrier Five.
The Greenbrier Five.
Never forget.
Second game I have here, this is Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern on SEC Network Plus. LSU is playing at Georgia, and while LSU played a very soft non-conference schedule, Georgia played an even softer non-conference schedule, one of the softest in the Power Four by almost any metric you look at. I don't think that Georgia is good at all, despite what their record says. They're 15-1. They ain't played nobody, Paul. And so I think LSU is going to go in there and win by double figures. LSU is favored by 13.5 points. I think that LSU is going to bounce back with a vengeance and win very comfortably in Athens. Because, of course, not only did Kim Mulkey's squad lose to Kentucky in that midweek tilt where Lane Kiffin made an appearance and they held hands, which was kind of weird, Mitch. They also lost. Yeah, just a little bit, but you can't spell Lane without an L, and you also can't spell a loss. I'm trying to make this make sense. Michaela Blakes has an L in her name. She didn't take the L. LSU did. They have an L in their name because Michaela Blakes decided to just go nuclear, as she so often does. Shout out to the Vanderbilt sophomore, fourth 30-plus point game of the season, and the first win over an AP top 5 team since 2009. Round us out. Who is your third pick this week? This is a Sunday game. This is Ohio State at the Maryland Terrapins. This one is Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern on Peacock. The Terps are favored by 3.5 points. I'm going to take the Terps and the points. Maryland did suffer their first loss of the season at Illinois the other day, but they bounced back and beat Indiana by double figures. I think Maryland's going to be fine. I think Illinois is actually like a pretty decent team. They'll be an NCAA tournament team, I think, for sure. Between now and the Buckeyes, they play at Rutgers. I think we all know how that game is going to go. And then they're going to beat Ohio State at home, I believe.
I misspoke earlier. Illinois beat Maryland. Washington handed Michigan their second loss of the season.
That's right.
Yes, I got my M logos confused in the Big Ten. It happens sometimes.
Yeah, it happens.
To recap, Mitch is taking 2 teams to get right. He's taking LSU, a 13.5 point favorite at Georgia on Thursday, and then Maryland to bounce back after their L to the Illinois Fighting Illini. They are a 3.5 point favorite at home against Ohio State on Sunday. And then he's going against the Vegas bettors. He is saying Texas Tech is not due for a loss. They will cover that 10.5 point spread at West Virginia. Are you taking them to win too?
I don't know. I'm just curious to see how much the line moves, but
okay.
I feel pretty confident that they're not going to lose by double figures at West Virginia.
File that one away. That is Making Money with Mitch. This is Last Call. All the storylines we may have missed in today's program. We already mentioned Texas Tech, the leader in the Big 12 standings. What we did not mention is that they are truly standing tall above the rest. Mitch, tell us about the newest addition to the folks out there in Lubbock.
Yeah, this was actually the first story that I wrote at USA Today. Got this confirmed on Thursday, New Year's Day, about the Red Raiders signing 7'1", apparently, Stephanie, I'm going to butcher her last name, Okechukwu. I'm going to go with that.
Stephanie O. Kind of like our friend French Alicia at South Carolina.
That's right. So and they have publicly announced this, since I reported it for USA Today. She is from Nigeria. She has a reported 7'4" wingspan. I believe she is 21 years old, so I'm not entirely sure how much eligibility she will be granted, but Texas Tech is trying to get her eligible for this season. They're still waiting on NCAA approval for that. This is a big, literally and figuratively, addition for Texas Tech, which is undefeated, off to their best start in program history. I think we can safely take Krista Gerlich off the hot seat I have a feeling that if this season continues in the right direction for them, like if they make the NCAA tournament, which I think they're definitely going to, and they win a game or two and, maybe go to the Sweet 16 or something, I think you might see the money people in Lubbock, Texas, finally turn the faucet on for Krista Gerlich and the women's basketball program.
Or will you, Mitch? This is the part of the show where we bring in the one and only producer, awful announcing columnist, Dimitri Ravanos, because Dimitri, you tell us from covering some other college sports, there may be an oil concern out there in Lubbock.
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you for having me, guys. First time, long time. Okay. First of all,
first time of 2026.
That's true. That's true. Keep in mind that this comes from material collected by message board geniuses. So not that
very reliable.
Well, not that it's not serious on the part of these people, but these people certainly do not represent the majority of Texas Tech fans, right? There is this narrative going around the Texas Tech fan base that the invasion of Venezuela is probably going to be bad for Texas Tech sports because they are so invested in oil futures that this is going to drive the price of oil down. And gosh, they just gave Brennan Sorsby $5 million, and I'm sure it was not cheap to get a 7'1" women's basketball player over from Nigeria, or maybe not cheap by the standards of what they have invested in the past in women's basketball. They have $1 million softball pitchers to pay. Like, there's a lot on the line for Texas Tech. So even though Texas, and especially West Texas, is deep red, I would imagine there is a contingent of Red Raider fans that very much have joined the resistance at this point for the sake of the future of Texas Tech sports.
Did Joey Maguire become like the next Roman emperor where they've just stretched it too thin to the point that because they paid their front seven on the defensive side of the football team, like they paid them so heavily that now all of a sudden we're going to start seeing that this empire has stretched too thin. They're paying too many folks and now they don't have the money.
That's the thing. I mean, you talk about, Mitch, what they could do for Gerlich and the women's basketball team. They can only pay half a football team. How are they going to then come out and give money to anything else? I would bet you will see in the future them do what they did for softball, where they will find one person that is a huge difference maker that they could throw a lot of money at, and that will be the extent of their investment over the top of what they are currently doing for women's basketball.
Yeah, well, I mean, for softball this year, like they also like paid other players, like they re-upped the deal with Najari Kennedy, but they also went out and got like UCLA's best pitcher, and they went out and got this really great hitter from Tennessee, and so I don't know what their softball roster cost, but it was expensive, and in relative to what teams are spending on softball. So this might be a World Series or bust year for Texas Tech if that money's about to dry up.
Wasn't that softball, that $1 million pitcher, didn't they poach her from Stanford?
Stanford. Yep.
They got David Bailey from Stanford. I mean, they're going to just start picking off all the best. Like, they're going to start a rowing team at some point just to keep screwing Stanford over as often as possible.
Or just hire Andrew Luckaway to.
Right.
Where are they going to row, though? Is there any water out there in Lubbock, or just?
I don't know Lubbock well enough to say.
I don't know how close it is to the Rio Grande or the Red River, but maybe all you do is you just bring up some of that oil and dig a trench for them to practice on.
You call Patrick Mahomes and say, build us a river.
Build us a river.
That's right. Patrick Mahomes doesn't have oil money. He's just got NFL money. You can tap him.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Dimitri, for that update when it comes to one of the feel-good stories of women's basketball and college sports at large in 2025-2026. Shout out to our friend Jeff Walls, not just a media darling and looking for microphones wherever he may be. He celebrated win number 500 over Virginia Tech in the last week, and so shout out to the Louisville head coach. Shout out to our boys over at OG Media. Can you describe, Mitch, and this is our brief little foray. We always have a little foray into men's basketball. I did want to shout out Ovius and Giglio, though, for the Will Wade reckoning. Can you just, for those who may only listen to this podcast, encourage them to go listen to the boys, but also at the same time, what is going on with Will Wade and the founders of OG Triangle Media?
Well, it's apparent that Will Wade listens to their podcast, and you should too. It's Ovius and Giglio, and they cover all things Triangle sports, and they're great. Giglio asked Will Wade in a press conference about Darian Williams, and I think Will Wade just had something teed up and ready to go for whoever was going to ask him about Darian Williams, and it happened to be Giglio, and he just went off the handle. And then NC State lost to Virginia, and looked kind of bad doing it. And I just want to say, like, you know, the thing with Will Wade is, like, nobody forced you to come into NC State when you got hired and talk all that mess about the reckoning. And nobody forced you to pose in photos like Jim Valvano, which is a thing that you did. And now it's like, you know, you wrote all these checks in the off season that you're not cashing, and that's on you. So if you want to get mad at somebody, like, probably mad at yourself. Like, I just, I don't know. Bad. NC State down bad in men's basketball right now.
Is Amir Khan still the manager? Did that get debunked?
I don't think so. I believe he's back at McNeese. I think someone put that out there that, like, we've talked a lot on this podcast about academic standards and credits not transferring. Apparently that was a situation.
Not only do we have a reckoning going on, you lost all your aura, as the kids say, which I don't even know if the kids are still using the word aura, but good for Amir Khan. Hopefully he gets his degree.
ESPN, December 11th, Myron Metcalf, Amir, quote, aura, unquote, Khan, the McNeese student manager who went viral for leading the team onto the court during its men's NCAA tournament run last season while carrying a boombox, has entered the portal. He recently transferred back home to McNeese State after a brief stay at NC State.
Oh, that's ESPN Radio's Myron Metcalf as
That's
well. Right. All right, couple more before we get out of here. A more serious note, do want to shout out Davidson's Sylvie Jackson, who was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma last week. Obviously rooting for her and the Wildcats, one of the better been major stories of the 2025-2026 season. And obviously it's a big blow to the Cats, Mitch.
Indeed, yeah. It's definitely a bummer. Got the chance to meet Sylvie at a game I went to recently, and sending good vibes her way. I think Davidson is still a really good team. I think they have a high ceiling this year. They gave NC State a really hell of a fight in that game down there near Charlotte. A10 play beginning now. I believe they started the year off 2-0 in A10 play. They got Richmond coming up. It's going to be a tough game. I actually might go down there on Wednesday night when they play St. Joe's. So
very nice. Very nice. Like that. Another mid-major we want to shout out, Arkansas State, a big dub over the Hogs in an in-state rivalry game, Mitch.
Yeah, actually, I wrote about Arkansas State last year during the NCAA tournament, or right before it started, and about their head coach, Destiny Rogers. She, when she got that job, she received, Dawn Staley, when she won her national championship, she did what Carolyn Peck did for her and cut pieces of the net up and sent them to Black women coaches across the country. And Des Rogers got one of those and just kind of used that as motivation. And, she is a Arkansas State alum, I believe, and, led them to the NCAA tournament for the first time ever last season. Maybe she should have gotten the Arkansas job. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So, they were too busy hiring. They were too busy hiring Ryan Silverfield.
They were too busy chasing Molly Miller and swinging and missing at her. Yeah. So
I was going to make a joke there, but I will refrain about swinging and missing Molly Miller. But continue, Mitch.
Heck of a win for Arkansas State.
Amen to that. And final notes, our friends at Clemson continuing to rise. Give us the latest with the Tigers, Mitch, because we knew that they were brewing in South Carolina, the real team of South Carolina. I'm just kidding, folks. Not yet. But top 10 recruiting class heading into the 2026 recruiting cycle. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, got a good batch of recruits coming in. They just went down to Miami and won very comfortably, 15 points, to get a good road win there. They're looking good. They're 11-5 on the season, 2-2 in ACC play. They got a big game coming up Thursday night where they host NC State. Honestly, like that's a game they can win, especially if Tilda Trigger is still dealing with an illness, which kept her out of Sunday's game against Cal. We'll continue to monitor that. And then they got Georgia Tech and Wake Forest coming up, and Virginia Tech after that. 3 very winnable games. They're pretty close to matching their win total already from last season. So, I think that middle of the pack ACC, as we talked about before, it's kind of murky and it'll settle itself out over these next couple weeks here. I think Clemson could be one of those teams that kind of rises into getting one of those NCAA tournament spots.
Another team to keep your eye on as the calendar has flipped to January. Conference play in full swing. Unrivaled tipping off today. Mitch, where will you be on assignment for the rest of the week before we talk to you next?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go to Davidson on Wednesday, so I'll be with Davidson St. Joe's seeing some A-10 action, and then there's no ACC home games here on Thursday night, so I believe I'll be off until Sunday as far as in-person game coverage goes, and then I think I'm going to go see our friend Adia Barnes play at NC State with SMU.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, the former Arizona head coach. I don't have any games on the docket as of right now, Mitch, because both of our local women's teams are on the road, but that could change at any given time. Men's teams making their ASUN debut at home later this week for both JU and UNF and the Jaguars. Yes, we're focused on the Jaguars. I think this is like the 5th or 6th show we've taped where I have the Victory Monday shirt on, and your Pittsburgh Steelers, of course. I'd be
I did watch the end of the Steelers-Ravens game last night, and I think a lot of people assume, like, if they don't know me super well, they just think that I'm a Ravens fan because I'm from Maryland. But as I explained to people, the Ravens didn't exist until I was like 6, and by then my dad had already brainwashed me into a Steelers fan. And in growing up in Maryland, I grew up around a lot of Ravens fans, so I love when the Ravens lose. And especially love when the Ravens lose to the Steelers, and especially love it when they lose in that fashion that they did last night. It was just so sweet. I loved every second of it.
And thank you for inadvertently reminding me that, yes, that is a Steelers cap. Mitch's new computer has arrived, folks. We're still figuring out why.
We're a little fuzzy here. Yeah.
Little fuzzy. But if you've made it this far into the program, if you're watching, if you're listening, we appreciate you for tuning into this week's The Women's Basketball Podcast. We will be back next week to recap the week that was in the wide world of women's hoops. Until then, we will catch you later.
Deuces.